Okay, so where we ended up last time was we made this, or we made part of this, if you remember. And the project where we ended up, let's see if I have the right one. No, this is actually before we ended up. I have a version somewhere here. I have to look where I've downloaded my version. Ah, yeah, this one. Okay. So I'm going to open that folder as well. New window. Web Interactivity workshop, this one. And so we worked from that start file. And we got to this point. Now, okay, also record. Yeah. So one of the problems I think is when we reach this point, maybe is that we got here, but we were confused as a group, I think, in the sense that we didn't really understand all of the aspects that we were building. Correct me if I'm wrong. If everybody's like, oh, this was super easy, then I can continue, but maybe there were some questions, right? So what I want to do, I want to tackle a couple of these questions by talking a little bit about programming in general, and not specifically about making a font editor or making an editor or even Vue.js, which we are using, but more specifically about, okay, how do you tackle problems in programming? Because that might be interesting. So in a sense, I want this workshop today to go a bit slower than we normally do, but I do that with a reason, which is the fact that I really want you to start doing things yourself, start thinking for yourself, and start problem solving more than just trying to follow what I'm doing on screen. So, and I think Fien last time mentioned a really important aspect. I think the code that we were stuck on, or that was maybe a bit too fast. I will keep being confused because I have this open twice, which is not very useful. So just to go back a little bit to what we did before. So we have this Vue font edit start project that we worked from. The index.html, that's the one we added. And remember that we added this thing here, this polygon with the points, glyph contour, and then we did a circle. Yeah, so lights, yes. And then we wrote this code, and I think this code is maybe a bit too confusing at the moment. So I wanted to go into detail, excruciating detail, let's say, on what exactly it is that we're trying to solve here. But first I want to do a quick review of the projects that we did last time, specifically the Glyphs project that we did, which is this one. Which is a simpler project, a simpler version of what the font editor, which is basically allowing us to view a font by clicking on each of these letters, and then also being able to click on these styles. So if I were to ask you to do this to make this, how would you get started without looking at the code? Like, how far would you get, do you think?
I would manage the HTML and CSS, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but maybe not the interactivity part. Okay. All right, so that's good to know. So that's why I wanted to start here with the recap. And note that this is specific to Vue.js. And I think initially, especially, you're going to need to watch the videos again and review and do these things before you can actually make these apps. But there's not really a way around it. I think there's some core important concepts that you really need to understand to be able to continue. And I want to highlight these here. So first thing, as you said, is the HTML code. The HTML code is based on Figma and on the design that we made here. And it's pretty conventional, I would say. We have we made one specific container block. Let's say that's the app. That's the entirety of the application. And that app is split up into template rows, which is this 75 pixels for the header, 65 for this row, one fur, which is like all the rest of the space for the main thing, and then 50 pixels for the one at the bottom. And then we have the header, which is actually not specific to Vue at all. There's no specific code because there's nothing dynamic happening here. So that's just the HTML as it is. Then the glyphs, that's a little bit special because here we don't want to write them all by hand. We could, but it's annoying and silly. So here what we do is our first Vue element comes into play here. And specifically what's happening here is that we have a list of glyphs, which are listed here. That's on my whole list of all the letters that I have in my font that I want to see. And in my Vue create app here, I have this list. I could also put the list immediately here. That would also work. But that just means that this code is very big and bloated. So I put it up here and I refer to this. Now, everything that I refer to here in this data block, I can access from my app just by using this Vue syntax. So either with a v dash something or with a colon in front or with the @ symbol in front. So the thing I'm referring to, so this is how I made one glyph, and I would do this in HTML first. I would just make 1 or 2 or 3 just to look at or see how it looks like. And then when I start seeing the pattern, then I add this, which is for glyph in glyph. This one, remember, this one is not actually, this is a name that I make up myself. This is what's called an alias. So every time we go through the list of glyphs, we are left with this alias. So we can alias this, and this is the name of the current glyph. So initially, for the first one, this would be this one, which is the first one in the list. So it would be A, then it would be B, for the next one, C, and so forth. And so you can really argue or think around that if you think about, okay, V4, glyph in glyph. Okay, glyph is now the letter A. Okay, so what happens? So here with these double brackets, double curlies, we say that we want the contents of that glyph alias inside of this string here, inside of this text. And remember, this is just the inside of the div, so we can put anything here. So if we write question marks, I should also look at the right project here. We end up with all these question marks, right? Because that's what we are writing here is immediately what we see here. So using these indications means we don't want to write the literal word glyph, which we could also do. We don't want that. Instead, we want the value of what's inside of glyph, which we do with these double brackets here. Note also that this is different from writing it like this. What this means is this is the literal string. So this is the literal word text glyph, which would not make sense here. So we really need the variable to be available to us and to access that. So that will be A in the first case, B in the second case, and so forth. And note that this is also something that we can operate on. For example, on a string, we can ask to, wait, I'll show you the initial one. So these are all uppercase. If we say to lowercase for each glyph, then we end up with all lowercase glyphs, right? So we can do something, or we can add like an exclamation mark after each one. And now it's like A, B, C, D. Very shouty app. So this is a very powerful statement because this means, okay, now repeat this thing so we don't have to do it manually. And there's not too much setup at all to be able to do this. And then we end up with, okay, so what's the interactivity part? And these two are actually the interactive parts. The first part is what happens if we click it. And then we set the current glyph to glyph. So this concept of the current glyph is also something that we invented, but that's very useful in apps because that's how we remember the state of the app, so where we are in the app. And the current glyph is also kept in data. So we have glyphs as data, the current glyph, which is the current thing that we're accessing. In this case, it's Q, so we are looking at the letter Q here. And then current style, which comes later, that's also something that we keep in that state. So going back here, this sets the current glyph to the glyph, the alias of the glyph that we click on. It's important to contrast this with this. It sort of looks the same. This means assignment. This means that the current glyph is now equal to the glyph. So it's basically putting that here. So it's like go inside of that variable. The other one, this one, is actually a different one. This is a comparison. So here we're comparing if the glyph is equal to the current glyph. And the output of this comparison can be two things. It can be true, in the sense that the current glyph is the glyph. And remember, we're walking through this list, so one of them will probably be true. Or it can be false in the other case where it's not true. So when the current glyph is not equal to the glyph. So this will be only true for one of them because there only one can be the current glyph. And what happens there? So if we click on A, what we see here is that this gets this active label here, right? So this is now active because this class says, well, the active class is available or is set whenever this condition is true, whatever that condition is. So we can also say like it's sunny if for somehow we can check out the weather and return true, then all the glyphs now are sunny because they all have this condition set to true. If like you have like mod random is bigger than 0.5, then like half of them will be sunny because this condition will be evaluated. Random gives a random value. If it's larger than between 0 and 1, so if larger than 0.5, that will be true in about half of the cases. So now you'll see that about half of the cases have this sunny label set. This is just to show that active is not a special thing, it can be anything. It's just it seems like a useful name in this case, because that's the one that we're clicking on. You could also name it current or something. And then, of course, this has an effect on CSS. So the .active thing here has a different background color. That's what it does. So we don't set the background color immediately in our app. We use CSS for that. Then we get to the preview, and the preview is actually, even though it looks like the biggest part, is actually super easy because all it's doing is showing the current glyph. And so we have a class inside, we have a div inside of a div. This one is just to center that in the preview div. And then here we say current glyph here, which is the text of the thing that we see. So if we write something else here, of course, we just see that. It's just a big placeholder, basically. There's one more thing here, and that's also important, is that this also applies a style, which are these things at the bottom. And actually, they use exactly the same system as before, as this one. The only difference is that we don't do it in a list now because we don't have that list here. So if we would have a list saying regular black italic, then we could also style that as the list. But in this case, we don't have that. So we're just styling them by listing them out one by one, and which is fine if we just have 3 or 5 or whatever, then it's fine to just do copy and pasting. I don't really mind. So what's the rule here? Well, the class is now style. That means that we have this basic styling here, but we also have this active class when the current style is equal to regular. Note the quotes here. These quotes are really important because here, before we didn't use the quotes. We could have written this, but this is completely wrong because what we're trying to do here is check if the current style is equal to the actual word regular. That's because also whenever we click, the current style will be set to the literal word regular. So that's what we are checking for. With glyph, the glyph will be like something like A, for example, or B. So it will be a string, but the word glyph is actually the variable that contains the string. It's not the actual string itself. The click is exactly the same. So just as we had here current glyph equals glyph, we say here current style equals, and then also here we do regular. Note that we could write spaces here. They don't really, they don't have an effect. So they're not really important. We can't do them here. We have to make sure that this doesn't happen. Because what's happening here is that if we add a space here, it's not exactly equal to this word, right? This word is basically regular without any spaces. The thing here is regular with a space, so they will never match.
I have a question quickly. Can you remind me what the colon before the class means in Vue?
Yeah. So whenever you see a colon, it's basically Vue saying, I'll handle this. Go step aside. Vue is doing its thing. It's coming in and it's handling this. And so what we see here with this class is that it's basically Vue's way of saying this is how I set style. So note that if we use a regular class, we could just write a word here or multiple words. We could do style, blah, whatever. Vue does it differently. So whenever we do a colon, that means that this thing is evaluated and Vue will use that. Now class is a little bit different than the rest of the properties, but we saw it in the very beginning in the hello project. We saw it here used with, for example, the image of the cat, if you remember. So that's this project, right? And here what's happening is that the source attribute is also handled by Vue. So instead of, if we leave this off, what's actually going to happen is that this thing is literally going to be cat image and not like, so literally the word cat image. That's not what we want. In this case, we want the data of cat image. So whatever's inside of cat image. And so that's the way that you can look at it. Whatever's inside of this variable is then contained in this other thing. So here we write this, and now this becomes something that Vue can evaluate. So it can look at it. It can say, do I know cat image? Yes, I do. Then I'm going to put that here. So here you could also, yeah, if you make a mistake here, you will also see Vue complain because it says, well, this property that you specified was accessed, but I don't know what it is. So you called it this, but I don't know what it is, which is an error that you will often see if you make a spelling mistake. You'll get this error. So it's basically not the browser that's seeing this, but Vue is seeing this first and then filling up the variable, filling that up with the Vue variable and sending that to the browser, sending the result of that to the browser. Because if you do it this way, what's end up with the image is then the actual image that we see here, which is also the value of cat image, right? So you can think of it as Vue managing that attribute. Vue is now in charge of that.
And
yeah, go ahead.
The at click, the at symbol, and also Vue4 basically do the same thing. Yeah,
these are also expressions for Vue, and you can write them. So V4 is the long form, but click, you can also do it like this. You can also write Vue bind, click, and this is actually also Vue bind, I think, or Vue something. I only write the short version. Actually, these are all shortcuts for the longer version. So click indeed also uses Vue to look at this. So whenever you see V4 or something starting with V dash, you know that this is Vue that's handling that. Whenever there's an @ sign, you know, okay, this is not a regular property, but Vue is accessing that before the browser sees it. And whenever you see a colon, you also have the same effect. So it's Vue first doing its thing, and then that turns into yeah, basically the text that goes in the normal class, and then that becomes the thing that the browser sees. Right, so eventually this will all be handled by the browser. It's not that this Vue just takes this and then hides it from the browser, but it turns into something. So in this case, it turns into either active being true, in this case where style would be style active, or nothing where the style just doesn't have active at all. That's what Vue is doing.
Thanks.
Good question. And then going here, so again, this is our simple Glyphs app. The main thing that you have to take away is, especially when you're writing these apps, is what kind of state do I need? And it might be that you need some help figuring that out, but this is like the core. What's the core that you need for state? And when we are doing our shopping app later today, we're also going to think about this from that perspective, like what do we need for when we are creating a shopping app? What's the core information that we need to know? There's probably like a card or something like but there's also a list of products. Yeah, something like that we have to remember. So that's really important whenever you're making an app. Is like, what's the core of my data? And out of there comes all the rest. Any questions for the Glyphs app, the smaller one? Do you want me to go over the Hello app also? So this one? Yeah, so Glyphs is actually, so we're working backwards a little bit. Glyphs was the second project we did, and then first we did Hello. And initially what we did is we just wrote HTML, right? That's So whenever we're making a Vue app, the first thing that we're doing is just writing the basic HTML as if it were a normal static web page where nothing is dynamic. So here what we did is we made a class app, and then here for the greeting, we just wrote like hello, right? And that still works. HTML just works in Vue whenever you expect it to. So there's nothing special about that as well. Same for the image. We can just write an image where the image is like image cat sit, and then that's like the normal image, right? Now we will have two images. That's like the normal image here. So there's nothing special about that. Now, once we start adding Vue, there's a couple of things that we need to do. The first thing is that we need this script always. That's our reference to Vue, which is the script that we're loading. If you go look at that, it's like this huge blob of code that we're not really concerned about. It's just Vue doing its thing, which is fine. And then the second script that we need, this is our actual code. That's the thing that kicks Vue into action. And for that, there's two core parts. Now, remember, there's a lot of things already going on here, but maybe I can show the smaller version, which we made together, which is this part where we're creating the app, and then this part where we mount the app. So this is basically like setting the app up, and this is like starting it or something, kicking it into action. The app.mount refers to .app, just as we do when we are referring to CSS, which means that we are, probably should look at the right CSS, right JavaScript as well, which we are referring to this class equals app, which means we are referring to it with a dot app. So leave this open, leave this open. So that's what we do with mounted app. And then to create an app, we always write this. Now, there's a lot of brackets, I know. That's the downside, I think, of Vue, that this is, yeah, complex. Once you get the brackets right, however, I think it makes some sense. So the first thing, again, is remembering what's the core state of our app. Now, in this case, it's a bit arbitrary, but we wanted to remember the name of the person that we're saying hello. Maybe this comes from somewhere else. And then we have the name of the cat. And the reason why is because we want to flip these images. And those things are probably what we want to render. So whenever this is, so this data, and then also computed data, which I'll talk about later, this data is the core of the Vue app. And that's when we are rendering our app, that's what we probably are going to use, either using these brackets like this, or using this colon, or using this v4. Those are like the three most basic things that we can do. So either we render it immediately inside of the text of the site, where we render it like this. Think about it, for example, a news article that you want to see, and you just take the text of the news article, and then this would be like article text or something. If you have a header for that article, you would do like, yeah, article title. I don't know. So something like this, then that would be part of your state. So that's one way that we can use it. The second way that we use it is as an attribute of an existing tag. Think as, for example, here, an image where we want to use it. That's the second way that we want to use it. And then the third way, and this is especially true if we're making lists. So if we have a list here of, I don't know, to-do list, let's say, I have like a do the dishes, dog. So now I have a to-do list. I know that it's a list because of these square brackets. Now I can access this list with v4. Now, what happens if I don't do that? If I just write to-do list like this? Nothing. It's kind of funny. I thought we would at least see something here. It's probably because I'm looking at the wrong thing. Okay, right. It's really important to keep watching the right thing. So I'm going to put a break tag here just so the image moves to the next line. Then you see it's basically showing literally what we typed here, right? So it's literally taking this thing and putting it here. Not very useful because that's not a real nice way to look at this list. So probably at that point, what we want to do is make an unordered list and then make a list item for each item in that to-do list. And again, here we write v4 equals, and now we say item in to-do list. This item I just invented that, right? I just made that up out of thin air. And then I can write the item here. So, and now I get this as a list of items, right? So that's the third way that I can show these things. So either just immediately as a string, which I also do here, then as an attribute like this, or as a list where I first go over the items of the list and then show them. Oftentimes, lists are a bit more complex than that. Now we're already getting into data, but maybe that's also important to see. So for a to-do item list, it would also make sense to show you if we already done the item or not. But maybe we can make a to-do app by itself a little bit later, and we don't want to focus on that too much. But I'll give you a small preview of that. So this is just a string, so it's a list of strings, but most of the times it will be a list of objects, and objects look like this. So it's basically a to-do list with two objects inside of them, and objects always have names and values, so keys and values. So the name here would be like the text of the item, I don't know. And then what else would we add? Well, if we have already done that job or not. So we've already done the dishes, which is good, but we haven't walked the dog yet. So we still have to do that, right? So now each item in the list, and now you see them like this, each item in the list is now an object that contains multiple properties. And the way that we can access these properties is then writing item.text, for example. So now we see the text again of that item. And then there's also item.done, which we can access like this. Now it just says true or false, which is not the best way, again, to show this, but visually it sort of shows what we're trying to do. Right? So that's really the core. And then there are, next to data, there are methods. So once we have, want to do some interactivity, some of that we can just do immediately inside of the app. But sometimes the, which we saw in the Glyphs example, where here, whenever we click, we just immediately set that state, which we can do. But oftentimes it makes sense to put that in a function, or as Vue calls them, methods. And then that method flipcat that we just did here, we put in this block called methods, and then we describe what it does. So it doesn't get called immediately. It only gets called, in this case, when we click this button, then we get a flipcat event. So in this case, when we click here. The way that we write it is up to us. In this case, what we are doing is we want to flip between the sitting cat and the yawning cat. And the way that I've chosen to do this is by looking if the cat image includes the word sit, because that's the main difference. So if it does, it means that I'm currently looking, this.cat image is currently, like it's here right now, it's the sitting cat. So then what needs to happen is that we don't want to see the sitting cat anymore, we want to see the yawning cat. So we change this.cat image, we assign, which with the single equal sign, we assign that cat-yawn. And then if the cat doesn't include sit, then we're looking at the yawning cat. So else, we're going to say this is now the sitting cat. That's what flipcat is doing. And note that it's doing something else also. It's not just changing this piece of data, but it also knows, and this is really core and important in Vue, that some parts in the app need to change. So the image actually needs to change, right? This is what we get for free for Vue. If we wanted to do this ourselves, which we did in the very beginning, is we would have to look up the image and then change the source attribute, or change the file name of that image. If we have the image in multiple places, we would have to change that in multiple places. In Vue, that doesn't work that way. We just refer to things in state. And then once we've referred to them, Vue knows automatically which parts of the app to update for us, which is super key. That's like the most important thing. Is it up?
Yeah. Couldn't you, I mean, what's the difference if you go back to the JS page or the Vue? Yeah, what's the difference between writing, could you not just write cat image dot includes it? I mean, what's the function of this?
This one?
Yeah, this.
Yeah. So this is basically referring to the current app. It's kind of confusing because most of the time we only have one. But in Vue, and we don't do that yet, in Vue you can also split your app up into multiple sections, and then this would refer to like the current section of your app. So if you have larger apps, you probably don't want to put everything in one big file. And then you can split that up. And then this becomes important because it refers to, okay, this specific block. Imagine, for example, that you have a gallery page, then each item in the gallery would have like a flip image or something, where at the back side of the image you see the artist or something, then this dot gallery image would be like the image that we're currently looking at instead of all the images.
Okay, so it's just saying, look at this local image.
Yeah, this is sort of like a local thing. And it's local in the sense, so the way that we talk about it in programming is called scope. It's local to this scope, and this is our app. That's what it's referring to. If we don't do that, it's going to look for cat image somewhere else in this file, and it won't find it, so it won't work. So if I leave out all of this here, and now I click, now it's complaining. It says, well, a cat image is not defined. So it's really important to add. Yeah.
Thanks.
Although we don't do it here. So as you can see, we don't have to refer to it here, which is just a convenience in Vue that we don't have to refer to it here. I think we can actually, as you can see, so it's possible to do it, but we don't have to. Vue already knows that we're talking about the current app. So that makes it a bit more convenient for us. All right, that's the hello thing. I have so many ideas of apps that I want to show you or do together. Yeah. Ja, kijk hoe. Ah ja, wacht, ik ga het even laten zien. So, if you don't have VS Code, you can use Code Sandbox, and here you can make a new sandbox. And then you just, there's Vue already. Ja. Geen wat? Premium? Ah, je moet betalen als ze dan.
En is dat misschien een te groot?
Nee, ik kijk import van GitHub had ik gedaan, bij import project.
Ja.
En ik de URL van het project dat ik dan had gemaakt in de eigen GitHub erin gezet.
En dat wou ik niet doen, of?
En dan komt je import.
Toch eens proberen, hè?
Dat lijkt me wel makkelijk, dat dat helemaal...
Ja. Import en fork.
Bij mij komt er... You need to be a patron to create a private sandbox.
Ah, maar je moet dat niet private doen.
Ja.
Ja.
Hoe moet je dat doen?
Ik heb gewoon een nieuw sandbox. En dan import. Maar er staat nergens private bij mij.
Nee, bij mij ook niet.
Ah, wacht. Dat is geen geheim, eigenlijk.
Ah, echt?
Nieuw
New sandbox.
import.
Hier, en dan, maar misschien is het iets mis van mijn link. En dan komt je altijd hier.
Ja.
Maar ik heb dat hier
Is het niet zonder die...
Gewoon hier.
Maar wacht.
Oei, oei.
Maar deze is wel private, hè?
Ah, dit moet ik dan.
Nee, je moet naar SBB en dan workshop. Dus
oké.
github.com/fdb/. Maar dat is nu volgende.
Ja.
Ja.
Dus dat, want dat is waar vorige week heb ik gewerkt.
Ah, ja. Maar dan zit dan, als je dit publiek maakt, is het ook cool.
Hoe moet dat?
Dus je gaat naar settings. Dan scroll je helemaal naar beneden. En dan scroll je in de danger zone. En dan kun je hier change repo visibility aanzetten. En dan moet je de naam nog eens ingeven. Ja, dus hier moet je dit typen of kun je dat creëren.
Ah, alleen.
En dan is het publiek en dan gaan we het wel kunnen
Oké.
doen. Ja, en weer refreshen. Zo, dat moet lukken.
Ah, kijk.
Yes. Okay.
Oei. Ja.
Dit is goed. Zo.
Ja.
Perfect. Mijn, get fancy. Dus. Okay, so I said we were going to talk about programming like from a step back. So maybe it's good to start writing an app as an exercise together. And I'll also, so the exercise that I did before, I coded before, so I know what it is, and it seems like a very fluent thing to do, but I wanted to code an app together with you that I don't know how to code yet because I haven't done it. And to show you my thinking of what I need to do. Maybe that helps. And the app that we're going to do is also not very difficult. We're going to make a to-do app because that allows us to, just basically have a basic app that's like, has some functionality, but it's not super, super complex. All right. So, and you can also help me, like it's like interactive. So what do I need to do first?
Make a new folder.
Yes, let's make a new folder. So let's do that together. We make a new folder. How are we going to call this? To-do app. Amazing. And then probably in our to-do app, we probably need like an index.html file, right? So what would make sense in our HTML file? How do we get started? Imagining that we already have an idea of how that to-do app is going to look for us, it sort of makes sense to do it first, like we're like in the middle of the app, I would say. So it feels like we have some to-dos already on the app. Some of them are checked, some of them are unchecked. There's like a box where we can type in a new to-do. So like everything's like, we're in the middle, you caught us in the middle of adding stuff to the to-do app. And the reason why is because if it's completely empty, there are some things that we're still missing. We don't know what we need to do. So if we had to do app with nothing in it, then it's kind of hard to work from there. So I like to work from something, I like to tackle this like in the middle, instead of starting with nothing. And that will also show when we're doing data. So the way that I did the data here, for example, which we are going to use exactly the same thing here, is that we already have some data to work with instead of working from nothing, because it's much easier, as you'll see. All right, so we know the basics right now, which is we type an exclamation mark and enter, and now we have our basic HTML page. So we are going to call this to-do app. And then probably we need to do some super, super basic styling. And this one I'm going to steal from the View Hello Start page. So in View Hello Start, I have an index.html. There is some basic styling. I'm just going to copy the styling for the body, not for the image. There's no image. So after the title, I'll add some style tags, enter, and then copy this for the body. Like that, View Hello Start. And it's basically this, right? So we have a bit of font, we have a background, we have a color, we have some margins, and so everything's not completely, boring. And then in our body, we're going to write h1 to do app. And then we'll look at that app, open with Live Server. Amazing. So what functionality do we need in the to-do app?
You need a list, I think, and maybe checkboxes.
Yeah, good idea. So how do we make a list? How would we? Yeah, so it seems like a good idea to use the UL tag, which is the unordered list tag. And then inside we have a list item. And so we're just going to invent the same list items as before. We're going to say that we still need to do dishes. We probably also need to, I don't know, feed the cat. I also do this weird uppercasing that's like completely unnecessary. Nobody writes like this. Amazing. So we have a to-do app. It will make sense to make them a bit bigger. So I'm going to say LI items have like a font size of, I don't know, 18 pixels. No, maybe more. Maybe a line height. So there's like a bit of extra line height of like 1.8. So they're a bit spaced out a little bit more. And And then, as you said, it sort of makes sense to add like a checkbox, right? And so the way that that's done in HTML is we have input type checked box, which shows us this little checkbox here in front. We're not going to focus too much on the styling, but we are adding that 3 times, right? And now let's imagine that we've already fed our cat, so that's done. Then we can add checked here. And then you see if with this property, the checked here is marked. Right? Everything good so far? Wacht, hè? Je kunt naar die file gaan. Maar je kunt een preview, hè? Maar die preview toont de fout. Dus ik denk, als je hierachter streepje tommel, streepje af, enter. Dus dat is allemaal.
Dan zie je waarom dat ook zo auto-complete of zo.
Nou, echt?
Ja, dat doet dat wel, maar misschien is het toch wel eens een restrictie. Ja, misschien wel.
Zeker wel. Dus doe eens to app slash, dat niks moet laten doen. Dus exact de file, er is to do app. Wat daar staat, hè, de volgende to do app. Stel ik even niks moet laten doen. Ja, dus dat was cool. En dan maken we dat refreshen. Dus als je nu die checkbox doet, input tijdens checkbox. In die list items, ja. Ja, het eerste list item, daar. En dan daar hebben we die input type checkbox. Okay, this works for everybody? Michelle? And I think this is nice about Vue is that we can just pretend that we already have a working application and then work from there. We don't have to. Yeah, this one is checked. Huh? Yeah. It would also be nice though that if we have a checked one, that the item itself also changes style. So here we're also going to add a class equals done. Let's not call it checked just to make sure that it's a different name. And then here we're going to style this. So remember, if we just add that class, nothing's going to change because it doesn't have any effect. We can look at this with the inspector to verify that indeed this middle one has the class equals done. So just as we typed it here, but it's not doing anything. And so here in style, what we do is we say list item done, and now we can change something. So for example, we can set the opacity to 0.5 so that they're transparent a little bit. Or we can say text decoration, no, what's it called? No, there's like strike through. It's not text decoration, it's line through. See, so now this one has line through, which means that it's indicated like this is not happening. Or I've already done this, right? That's enough, I think, for the basic to-do app. And then probably here after this one, we probably also want a big text field with the new to-do item. And we're going to write a placeholder here. And placeholder is just like the gray text that you see behind it, where it's saying type your to-do item, which is this one. And I'll do a little bit of styling, which is just that for the input, I want to make the font size also really large, like 24 pixels, and add a bit of padding. Yeah. Not too fancy, but just to have something there. Yeah. Pardon. Okay, you get something that looks like this.
What was the
Ja, dat is gewoon... ja, het is een beetje gelijk gerelateerd aan je fontgrootte van je site. Maar als je dat verwarrend vindt, kun je ook gewoon pixels. Ja. Een rem gaat ongeveer overeenkomen met 18 pixels, waar dat de default font is. Dit. Oei. Is dat hier, hè? Die input? En dus die placeholder, dat is die grijze tekst hè, hieronder. Dus eens dat je begint te typen, gaat die weg. Dat is wel handig. Je weet wat er moet gebeuren. Dan moet er niet nog eens een label bij zijn. But also it's important right now that you are basically that you're able to walk out of this room or wherever you are online and that you're able to write this without looking at the code at all, right? So think about what you're typing. Don't just blindly type what you're seeing, but really think about, okay, I have to write an input. Now here, I don't write the whole thing. I just write input tab, and then that's going to already write this for me. No, this one and this one are completely unrelated. If this clause is not here, then it's still checked, but it doesn't say done. And that's because here we actually have a style for that. We say that a list item with the class done has an opacity of 0.5 and a text decoration of line true.
So if the get isn't checked, there shouldn't be a line.
No, these two are unrelated. You can still uncheck it right now. But the reason why there's a line is because this one has class equals done. Ja, je kunt hierop klikken. Yeah, so there's no consistency in the app at all. Nothing works. Same thing here. If we check another one, they don't work, right? That's our job. Yeah, to make sure that these things are actually working. Yeah. Yeah, good point. Do we need anything else in our app? I don't think so. So this is from HTML and CSS point of view. We're done, basically. We don't have to do anything else. So now comes the interactive part. And so for the interactive part, the first thing that we need is our link to Vue. So we can copy and paste that from somewhere else if we want. I'm going to look at Vue hello start, look at the index.html, and then the line that I want is this one, right? It's just a script tag linking to Vue. And note that this one is written right before the closing head tag. So I'm going to copy this. I'm also going to close a couple of things down here. And then right before the closing head tag, so that's here, I'm going to put in that script. And then I also, so this just loads Vue, but it doesn't do anything. We also have to use Vue in our app. And we do that by adding our own script, which we do right below the body tag. Now, here it makes sense to actually make the script first. So in the to-do app, what I'm going to do is click here. That's going to close that down, which is fine. Then I'm going to make a new folder called JS. And then inside of that JS folder, so note I'm clicked here, I'm going to create a new file by clicking this icon here, main.js. Note that if I use these icons here at the top, they create new files or folder wherever I'm selected, right? Whether that's open or closed. But it's important to make sure that you're on the right place when you click these buttons. Otherwise, they will create files in the wrong location.
You can try them also, right?
Yeah, if you want. But it's sort of confusing because the only indication is like a little difference in spacing. So here, it's kind of hard to see, are these both in the JS folder or are they both in the root folder? So that's why, and you can close it down and sort of see, but it's kind of confusing. So that's why I also like to do a sanity check where I just print out something here where I say loaded. And this is just for me to verify that I'm actually loading the JavaScript file, which in this case, I'm not. So if I look at the console now, I don't get any feedback. I do get feedback that the fact that I'm using Vue, that it's loading, that's fine. But this one doesn't work. And why isn't it that working?
We didn't write the script.
Yeah.
No.
And we do that in the same way that we write the script here. So we write script. In Emmet, actually, we can use this one, this variation here, script : source, just enter that. And then we get a script with the source attribute here set for us. And now we refer to that file. And normally, if we just start typing like a J or JS/, we should get autocompletion to indicate that that's the right file. Now, if we save and we go back, we should see it where it says loaded here. If it doesn't, then you shout, and then I can help you.
Yeah. How many times?
Sorry? Dit? Ja. Ah, hier. Ja, waar je geschreven hebt. Hè. So if you wrote loaded here, console log loaded, that's going to log that string, that text is going to be put on the console. That's what I want to see. Nee? So check that that script works. If what I start doing, if I really get into trouble, is I go to the network tab, and here I can also see which scripts are loading. So for example, if I made a typo here, then I'm going to see that this one gets a 404, which means that this script is not loading for me. Like it's the wrong script. Ah, yeah. So the network tab tells you which files are loading correctly. Ideally, if it's your own site, none of this should be 404 because these are all your own files, so you don't want any of them to fail. All right, and now what I think is the most difficult part for setup is doing the view initialization. So if you're really confused, you can copy that from somewhere else, but I'm going to write it from scratch, brackets and all. So the first thing that we need is an app. So we're going to write const, which makes a variable, app equals, and then with an uppercase V, view.createApp. View.createApp is a function, and a function always requires these brackets like this. But functions sometimes have arguments, as they are called. So the first argument and the only argument to view.createApp, that function, is an object. And an object we write with these curly brackets here. Now, there's a lot of things going to happen inside of that object. So what we're going to do is press enter and then have some more stuff that we can write. Remember before I talked about objects as well when we were talking about the to-do list, which I'm currently looking for, hunting. Yeah, so this is also an object. And note that the object always consists of key, value, and then a comma, key, value. And this is used everywhere. So it's a really important concept. And it's also just something that you have. So it's like a mini database. If you're describing a person, you would say, okay, the name is this, the age is that, the color of his hair or her hair is that, whatever. So these are properties of that person that you assign. So the names of the properties are probably going to be the same everywhere if you have a list, but the values will be different. And so this one is also an object and also has properties. And we saw a couple of them already. We saw that data is a property. We saw that methods is a property, and also computed is a property. So in our case, the way that we would normally write this in the long form is data, and then we would write a function which would look like this. Now, we can do this because this is how we write a function here. We could do this, but the shorter version in JavaScript is leaving out a column like this and also leaving out this. So we're basically writing the same thing, but we're just making it a bit shorter for ourselves. But remember, this is really setting the data attribute in that object, but it's setting it to a function. And if it's a function, most of functions return something, so they do something. In this case, we return the initial data of our app, so the starting date of our app. That's also a really important concept. So the data here is actually the start data, because once we are working with the app, that data is constantly going to be changing. So this will only be called once in the beginning of our app when it's asking like, okay, which data do we need to start our app? And now it's up to you. So what data do we actually need for our to-do app? How do we start? So think about, do you have a to-do app on your phone? I have one, I think. So the core thing about that to-do app is this part, right? The list of things I have to do. There's like more features in this one, but this one is basically this list of items. So I have to give that a name. How am I going to call this?
Finish.
Finish?
Yeah.
The things I have to finish.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or like items, or like lists.
Maar die items staan er al in de index.
Yeah, but we are going to remove these later because this is just a dummy version, right? Ideally, we want this to be dynamic based on what the user is typing, not on what we said. It would be a really weird app if like every time we open it, it's like you're doing the dishes.
So we need to replace those with
Yeah.
to the
Right. So we're going to replace this with a list of v4 view attribute tag thingy to indicate that this is going to go over the items of our to-do app. So probably something like items makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And items, remember, this is a to-do list app. So items is then a list.
Mhm.
And before I showed you that we could use a list of strings. So now we have to think a bit, okay, what does each item need? Well, it can be just a string, but if it's just a string, how do we indicate that it's already done? So it can't really be just a string, it has to be an object. So we're going to give ourselves a little bit more room here by doing this. And then we're going to make an object again. And so each object in our items list or to-do items will have the same structure. It will have a flag indicating whether if the item is done, so true or false. True, it's done. False, it's not done. And the other thing it needs is the text of the item. So I called it text, but you could also just call it, some people would call it item or text or like title or description. Those are all valid names. None of them are correct or more correct. Well, some of them are worse. Like if you call it something like this, it's probably not a good idea. But anything that works for you sort of makes sense. So I will call it like, I'm going to use description. And the only reason why I call this description is because it's a long word. And it's clear to indicate that it's not a specific thing. If I call it text, you could think, okay, text is something that's built into Vue or something, but this is just our own concept, right? As I said before, it makes sense if you're making an app like this to start out with a couple of initial data to just give your app a little bit of life before you actually load in that data from somewhere else or present people with an empty list, because that makes it more difficult to work with. And this is how I always work. I start with an app that's like in the middle of its process, or said otherwise, I start with the read-only version of the app, the version that already has some data, but that doesn't have any features yet to change the data in the app. But that's sort of a view on something that's already available in the app. So I'm going to copy a couple of these items here. I'm going to say do the dishes as the description of an item. And then I'm also going to set this done flag to false because I haven't done this yet. And then because these are items and this is a list, remember these brackets are indicating a list. Each of the items in the list also has a comma at the end. Just as if the list would be just letters, for example, they would also need commas here at the end, right? So these commas are actually indicating that this item is now done and now we're ready for the next item. So here we're going to write description again. And then the next item will be okay, paying my bills or something. And that one is done as well. Yeah, Israel?
Is there a reason that you're doing a space before a description?
No. The reason is that if I save now, Prettier will do it for me. So it's just the standard way that this is formatted in JavaScript. It just gives everything a little bit more room, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, there's already enough brackets. So now I'm going to make a third one. Actually, a good trick is if you're not selecting anything and you just press copy paste without selecting what you want to copy, it's just going to copy the line itself. So you do on this line, I just do Command C, Command V, and now it's just copying that line. Dus je selecteert niks En je doet gewoon Ctrl-C, of appeltje C, appeltje V, en dan kopieert hem die lijn. En dus nu kun je ook VVV en dan blijft hem dat plakken. And then the last thing I have to do is go for a walk. And I haven't done that yet, so this one is set to false as well. So what we want to see in our app is then these three items. So do the dishes, pay my bills, that would be done, and then go for a walk, which would be false, right? Gewoon, wacht, dat copy-pasten of wat? Wel de... In Visual Studio Code. Ah ja, dus als je gewoon op een lijn gaat staan en je selecteert niks, je doet command appeltje C, appeltje P en dan plakt hem die lijn. Bonk. Nee? Oké, dat is ook niet het belangrijkste van de les. Ik zou teleurgesteld zijn als het enige is dat je herinnert van je les. Ja, dan moest copy-pasten, maar dat werkt niet. All right, and now comes the magic. So we're done with our view part. That's not entirely true. We still have to mount our app. But this part, really, I want to leave up to you. So now I want you to think. So I'm going to write one last line, which is this const mounted app equals app.mount at .app. Do we actually have a .app? No, we don't. So we still have to make that. And then I'm going to do leave integrating this with the actual items. That's the part that I want you to figure out for a while. So as I said before, yeah, here it says fail to mount app, mount target selector return null. So as I said, I want to show you all the mistakes that I make as well. Because we didn't start out as a Vue app, we now come into this issue of, okay, what do we need to make is a Vue app? And for Vue, what we need is we need a main element to select. Now, we could actually select body here. This is probably a bad idea, but we can actually select body. It doesn't like that, though, because the script is also in there. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to start a div here and end it here. Right? So we're going to write div class equals app. And then that final div here, we're going to close here after the UL tag. Right, so this is now my app. Okay.
Can we look at the...
You can do whatever you want. Yeah. So if it's not entirely clear, what we want to do is basically rip out this one with the list items and leave just one. And that one is going to loop over the items in the list and then make them dynamic. If you're not doing the check thing first, that's fine. Or the class here, that's fine. Just start by showing like 3 items in the list itself. Ja. Ja, dat is de bedoeling. De bedoeling is dat het werkt eigenlijk. Hè? Dus de bedoeling is dat ik hier een item kan toevoegen. So I can add an item here, and then I can see it here. Or I can see it specifically, I can see it here. So if I have 4 items here, if I have 4 items here, then I want to see 4 items here, the same ones. If it's too complex, think about breaking it down into smaller pieces. Or in this case, maybe even better, work from analogy. Think about, okay, where did we do this before? And can I copy and paste that code from somewhere? Yeah, the data is there. It's final. We don't have to change the data anymore. Actually, we don't have to do anything here in the Vue app at the moment right now. Yeah, you want to look at the data.
De mensen zeggen wel, de console view is not defined.
Oei, dat is niet gewoon.
Dat is ook wel onderlijnd.
En in het rood.
Ja.
Dat is, kan dat je in je HTML, dat ik snel HTML.
Maar bij deze, dus ik heb het gewoon gekopieerd van een van die.
Ja, maar vermist die script line. Het is lijn 29 mijn script referentie naar Vue.js.
Ja, dat is het.
Oh, wacht. Maar,
Dat is dat fout.
ja, dit moet eigenlijk
Ah.
hier voor je body, zowel in het als in script tag. Staat nu op een heel vreemde plaats.
Ik dacht dat dat voor de hit was.
Ja, maar het moet op lijn 30 staat het en dan begint de body. Dus je hoofd, dat is in dicht ook zo. Je hoofd eindigt en dan begint je lijf.
Ja, ja.
Dat is die
Dat is
analogie.
de laatste style, hè. Dus oei,
Ja, dat is goed.
wat is er gebeurd? Ah, dat is...
En als je het afsluiten, daar moet ook hier.
Ah,
Dus die kunt er ook uit. En
vandaar, er is aan voor de hit, dus ik had er aan, want de hit stond fout.
ja.
Oei, maar die is dat weg.
ID is wel wat je niet
Dat was toch juist ervoor?
ja, maar ervoor was er niks aan het laden, dus dat kan dat er daarvoor niks werkt. Het is gewoon een kleintje omhoog, maar er staan nog meer op. Attribute cannot contain. Ja, er staat ergens input types tekst en dan staat er iets heel raar, denk ik, van het recht geschreven. Dus nee is ID en dan er staat geen iets gelijk aan. Nu, dat mag er eigenlijk gewoon uit. Je hebt dat ook
Ah,
niet.
dat is er weg.
Ja. Ja, dat is zeven. Dus nu, wat een Vue doet, is eigenlijk echt heel je code lezen. En Vue is eigenlijk nog strikter dan je gebruiker. Je gaat echt kijken, oké, als er foutjes in staan, dan kan dat niet meer lezen.
Ja, ik denk dat van het begin gewoon nooit dat moeten volgen.
Ja. Dat is nu geen errors meer dat je gelooft.
Ja, nu moet ik even zo van.
Ja.
Kijk eens hoe wat doen. Maar ik kan de andere.
Wel, ja, dit is even aan de andere code. Kunnen die open doen?
Ja.
Bijvoorbeeld Glyphs. Daar doen we ook, daar hebben we ook een lijstje van alle letters. Hoe tonen we dat? Die letters. En dat zit echt in indexmutatie. Dat is goed. Naar dat index gaan kijken. So if you're...
Ja, dat
So little hint, we don't have to do anything in JavaScript right now. So just if we're looking at the app, all we have to do is define the data, mount the app, and now the rest of the changes actually happen in HTML. That's the core principle of Vue.js. But this one, we have to do differently, that we can only have one. And so a good analogy is you look at Vue Glyphs end, for example. If you look at the index.html, here you see the same thing. So we have glyphs and we loop over them. We say v4 glyph in glyphs. So basically we have to think, okay, how does this work in a to-do app? Where do we have to loop over? We don't have glyphs, obviously, but we have something else. So this is a core, this is like the key of making your app work. Indra, lukt het voor jullie?
I'm thinking.
Yeah, this is the hard part, because before you could just follow, but now I'm asking you to do something, and you see that it's kind of different if you have to do it yourself. But of course, that's the key. The key is that you're able to do it yourself. That's why I also wanted to rewind a little bit and give you a bit of time to think about this.
Yeah, it's very useful that you explain it again, but slowly this time.
Yeah, okay. But now, what do we need to do? That's the question.
So, I mean, instead of glyphs, we would have items, right?
Yeah, yeah. So if you look at Glyphs end, we have here glyph in glyphs. So that has to be changed to something else, right?
Right, so it'd be item in items.
All right. Yeah, try that.
Okay.
So where do you, like we have 3 items now, where do we put it?
Can I can I say what I want to do and then you write it down, because it's too hard for me to,
Yeah.
because I'm on a, yeah, I just have to switch windows constantly. So you would create a new div thing.
Where's the header?
With the wait, hang on.
Items. Or maybe work in the div class app, that's already there. Or not?
Dat zou ze maar doen.
Deze.
Right. Yeah, so you'd make a div thing and then you do class equals app. Again, class equals item, actually. Right?
Okay, so
you just copy the, you just, right? And then just, I guess create yet another div. What would you call it? A tag, like a div tag or a div?
Yeah, inside of this item.
Wait.
Yes, I think another div.
Yes, inside.
Okay.
And then
Class equals item. What the first div should be items, maybe? Yeah.
Yeah. So this is items like this, and then here there's items.
Same thing that for the.
Yeah. So similar to where we have this class here, and then this, like a singular. This is like the plural, and then this is like singular, one glyph. Okay. So nothing's happening.
don't you have to comment this?
This one we don't need. You mean like this? Yeah. Okay. So I do command / to basically comment out these lines so we don't see them. Vue doesn't do anything with them. All right. So we have this. I'm going to give myself a bit of room here, like this. All right. So what's the next step? So I have this structure.
I mean, the same. You do the v4 item in items, maybe. I don't know.
Right. Let's try that. So v4 equals item in items. And then just without doing anything, let's save. Let's see what happens. So on the page, it doesn't look like anything's happening, but if we open this, we will see that we have items, and then we have, in fact, 4 items. So something's happening, right?
There are 4 now.
There are 4 because I made a 4th one here. Yeah. So if you have 3 here, then you will have 3 here. Yeah. So that's, we don't get an extra one from Vue for free.
And then we have to make them.
Yeah. You have to make them visible. Yeah.
So you have the double braces.
Where?
That would be
with met dubbel punt.
Hier?
Nee,
Hier?
Tussen de eerste klas en de v4.
Ah, hier.
Ja.
Waar is die v4 voor?
Dit is uw loop. Dit is hetgeen dat ervoor zorgt. So this means the v4 is actually what's going to loop over your items. If we include this item won't be executed once, but it will be executed as many times as we have items in our list. So this is essential. This is what actually makes Vue work. If we don't have this, we only get 1 item. Yeah. Well, here, indeed, if you look at the example, we have the class, which we have the v4, we have the click, we have this one. We're going to ignore these for now, right? These are, we just want to see, initially, we just want to see the description of each item. So how do we do that?
Aber ich will nicht, dass das in der URL.
I thought you would do the double braces after the current. So
Yeah.
in the right there.
Yeah,
So
right
you
here. So I'm helping you a little bit because So if you write something here, that's also important. Whatever, just without any double braces, that's just going to be copied as many times as we see items, right? Because V4, we're not using anything of that item now, but that's fine. If we don't need to do anything with that item, we can just write whatever we want.
So now, I am to do.
So now we write the double braces.
And then item.
And then we write items, like this. Yeah, so items, what that does is it's basically going to take this dot items, which is this whole thing, and then put this whole thing here 3 times. Like here, like here. Yeah. So you see, it's not complaining. It's actually doing exactly what you're asking it to, but also that's the problem. So items is everything. Item is referring to this single item. And so every time, so basically what Vue is doing is 3 times, but then this one will be like item 0, and this will be item 1, and this will be item 2, right?
Yeah.
That's what it's doing. Okay, so if we just list item, we now get this.
We still need this double, double things class in between.
Here?
Yeah. To wake up Vue.
No. Actually, no. Just to see the item itself, we don't need that. We will need it if we want to make sure that we have one of the items that's actually done. But we don't, or the active one, which is what we did here. But we don't need it right now because we don't need to set that. But what we do need for each item is we don't want to see the whole thing, right? We now see the entire item object. And this is different from the Glyphs app, because in Glyphs, all the glyphs, where are they? So the glyphs here are also a list, but the list just contains strings. So there, we just take one out and we're done because there's nothing extra here. This is a bit different here. And so here we take an item, but an item is actually an object, which means it refers to this entire structure, right? Which is perfectly normal. That's how you would normally do. If you have a page on your site with projects, a project also has multiple information. It has an image of the project, it has a title, it has a date, it has whatever. So this is a normal way of working with that thing. But that also means that if you're indexing or accessing an item here, you're not done yet. You still have to access a property of that item, as it's called. So these are the properties of the item. And the way that you do it is by writing a dot. And in this case, which property do we want to see of our item?
Description.
Yeah, because here, so this is the actual text that we want to see is item.description. So that's what we write, and now we just see the items themselves. Cool. So I'm going to leave you to type and make sure that this works for everybody. So you have this working and you also see it in your browser. If it's not working, then you can tell me. Ik ga het niet stoppen met selecteren, want dan zie je het niet goed. Wacht, maar hoe komt dat jij die oude die nog ziet? Voilà. Dat is al beter. Allee, beter. Ik krijg iets te zien. Zelf iets doen. En laat wel een winkeltje, dus dat is en hier bij Apple mensen in het waar. Dus je hebt Apple mensen, en dan raakt het zo doen, ja, dat snap ik niet. Ja, de gewone maakt. Ja, dus je hebt de functie, en dan als het string, moet het puntje. Dat is een string, dan is het woord, en dan is het een puntje. Ja. En waarom doen we dit? Dat is eigenlijk om die kaart te krijgen. Dus dit hebben we ook dit is iets dat je ook ons hebt vergeten. Dus dat worden er iets klaar staan, of als je boos staat, dat is altijd hetzelfde. Dus dit is ik vergeet dat ook. Maar het belangrijkste is dus dat je hier toegevoegd. Dat je data hier en dan hier ja. So are we done? Before we continue, there's something that I want you to pay attention to. Ja, Isra, vraag me.
No, mine is just not working for some reason, but you can go ahead. We can.
Yeah. Do you get an error?
No, it's just showing up item description as instead of it's just here. Maybe I'll share my screen for a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I can't share my screen while you're sharing, actually.
Okay. Stop sharing.
Sure.
Oh yeah, so it's literally saying item.description. Yeah. So we had that with Michelle as well. And that sometimes happens if Vue itself is not loaded. So if you go to main.js, main.js, do you have the console log at the top? And yeah, and does it actually show the console.log? If you go to console, oh no. Yeah, so this one you should keep attention to because now you get an error. So here it says main.js at line 7. The first line is okay, but the second line says at line 7 there's a problem. So here it says description, do 1, and then you just write false. But here you also need to do this key : value. So the key here is what we call done : false. So we need to specify the key as well. So we can't just write false. We have to write what is false. So in this case, the property is called done : and then false, and then the same thing for the true one.
This done word is something from Vue.
No.
Something we invented.
Yeah, we can say done and then we're there. So now you see the 3 to-dos. Now it's working, Isra?
Yep.
All right, cool. Go back to sharing. What I want you to pay attention to is what we had with the old HTML. We had a bit of different structure. So forget about the Glyphs thing, but if you just look at the structure that we had, so if we ignore this this new precious code that we wrote, I'm just going to remove it. But look at this. No, wait. Just wait. I just want to explain what we had before is we had these list items, right? We had these items. Now, I don't see that appearing in the new code. So we did indeed work by analogy, and this is normal because you're now just struggling with all the concepts at the same time in your head. We've actually worked a little bit too much out of analogy because we just copied the code that we saw from the Glyphs project, which is this structure with div, without actually understanding which parts we need to copy and which parts we don't need to copy. And the reason why I say that is because we already had this structure. We already had this idea of the parent element and then the child elements. In our case, the parent element, the class equals items, is this unordered list. That's where all my child elements are. And the child elements themselves are not divs, as you see here, but they're actually these list items, right? These are the ones that are actually my child items. So we're not going to do the whole exercise again. We don't have to, but instead we're going to move a couple of things. So instead of divs, inside of UL, what we're going to do is make the UL itself, give that the class of items, like this. Although that's not a Vue specific thing, right? That's just HTML. We don't even need it, but just to show you that it can go here. And then instead of saying div class item, now initially we're just going to make, instead of a div, we're just going to make this a li item, right? A list item, which means we can also remove these divs. And now, if you look at it, it sort of has a same structure as the one that we see above here, right? So it's also an item with a description. And this is the exercise that I want you to do in Vue as well. Is if you have a list like this, is say, okay, which are the items that get repeated? Okay, so in this case, what's repeated is you take one of them. For example, you take this one, you remove this, and then you write here, you write v4 equal item in items. And basically that's all you need. So if we only do this, we're already in the right track, because what we see now is we get this first item repeated a couple of times, right? We see that we get a repetition here. So again, working from, I'm just going to remove this code here, put it here, so you can have a reference here to it. But remember the initial
Frederick, you muted yourself.
Sorry. Thanks. I have all these shortcuts and they sometimes interfere with Zoom. So the initial code that I had, if we ignore this part, is we had this one, right? This is what gave us these normal items. And so the translation that we do to Vue, if we want to turn this into list, is we just take the first item, let's say, we comment out the other items, we leave the first item intact, and here we just write v4. That's all we need in Vue initially to get that item, right? So
I still don't get the V4.
okay, so what v4 is doing is basically, Vue is a templating language. Vue is basically allowing us to say this needs to be repeated a couple of times. So v4 is like repeat. So it's repeating as many times as we have items. And for each item, it's going to be make something available to us, an alias, and that's this item thing that we can reference.
So this is the item in the items. Ja, maar dan vraag ik mij ook af, want nu dat items in item, maar dat zou dan ook kunnen zijn als we die items hadden genoemd in de data.
Ja, dan werkt het ook niet, hè? So if this is called to-do items, written like this, for example, then this doesn't work, right?
Yes, but
then here it also has to be to-do items. An item is also our, so we could also use it like my item or something.
Where did we define item?
This one? No,
Yes.
nowhere. So whenever we do this, whenever we write this statement, Vue is basically saying, okay, you're making something called item and you're giving that a new name. So this is where we make item into a new name, like a singular term for that name. No, item is every time, item is, so in the first case, item is this. Yeah, it's an object containing both a description property and a done property. So if you want to call it something else, that's fine as well. And as long as we don't reference it, what's going to happen is Vue is just going to take over all of this HTML code, right? It's going to take over this checkbox and it's going to take over this string and just put it there literally, right? Which is sort of, I think, sort of convenient, or let's say sort of, yeah, okay, that Vue is not doing too much magic. It's just clearly showing what it's trying to do. So I now worked from this, and I also suggest that you do this. So what do we need to change here? How do we actually don't see the text do the dishes, but then see the actual text of the item?
Double braces, right?
Yeah, so here we write item. And if we just write item like before, we see the whole thing here.
So item.
Yeah, so here we go inside of our item and we take out this, the value of this property, which we do by typing the dot, and then we say item.description. And now we just see those descriptions, right? So the benefit of working this way is that our HTML is already correct. We don't have to worry about its HTML. All we are doing now in Vue is adding a couple of attributes and changing the things that are non-dynamic to things that are dynamic. So I'm going to let you complete this and make sure that you actually see the items. Note that they're not checked. None of them are checked right now.
Is there a reason that you changed it to do items?
No, it's just to prove a point. But, and that's really important, if I do it here, so I change it here as well, right? So if this is called items in main.js, then it also needs to be items here. But so items is not a special name, it's something that we can invent. Item is not a special name, this one just refers to this one. So all of these names we can choose. All right, so how do we make that the middle item, in my case, which is done is true, how do we make that one checked? If we just think about from an HTML perspective, what needs to happen to make sure that an item is checked? But did we call it active though? We gave it a different name. So look at this one. This one doesn't have active at all.
Checked.
Well, indeed, there's two things. You're both correct. So one is that this input has the checked word, and the other one is that we have class equals done. Which one do we know how to do? Michelle. None of them. But we kind of did this one, right? When we are looking for the current glyph in our thing here, we also had this class, right? This is sort of similar. So we probably want to do this as well. So let's try it first for everything. So if you're confused, that's fine. Let's first try it. What happens if we just do it for everything? So if we just write class equals done. Also important point, I didn't want to interrupt Cato before, but the order of the attributes don't really matter. So we can write it here, or we can write it here. There's no order, right? So it doesn't really matter. So class is done. What happens now is that they're all done, right? They're all marked as done because this is not dynamic. Vue is not handling this. It's just, it doesn't have a colon in front. So it's just everything's happening. All right, can we do this in Vue and then indicate that they're all active or all done in Vue? Yeah, so write a colon here. Now if we save, we see that we get an error because now Vue is saying, well, now done is something that I'm going to look for in my data, right? So that's not really what we're looking for. So this basically means that Vue is now managing this property. Vue is now handling this property. So it's calculating something inside here. So we are going to set a rule. And then that rule is going to affect whether the class will be done or not. So very simply, if we do it like this, which is kind of a complex way, is basically the class is set to the string done. And now Vue says, okay, now they're all done because the class is all set to that string. Not very useful, but just a nice way to show. Now, the way that we do it here is a bit differently. We use, again, an object. And then the property is the name of the class. So active, in our case, this would not be active, but done. That's the class that we want to see. And then we have this condition. So when is it done? So we don't know that second part, but maybe we know the first part. So we write a object here inside. And we're going to write done. And now the condition, we're just going to say always true. So whenever, like, we don't care, class is going to be set always to true. And now what should happen is that they're all set to done, right? We can also inspect that and basically see that they're all done. Why? Because the class is now set as an object where done is always true. That's of course not ideal, but this is a start, right? Fien, is it okay for you? Are you able to follow?
Ja, ik kan wel volgen, maar ik snap wel niet zo goed alles betekent.
Ah ja. Ja, dat is een beetje de essentie natuurlijk. Ja.
Vooral dan snap ik wel die voor, dat inhaalt, en dat er ruimt, maar dan die dubbele puntijn heeft.
Deze wilde zeggen. Yeah, so if you don't do this, what happens is that the class will be set literally to this word done equals true, right? So now Vue is basically having a hands-off approach. It's not doing anything. When we do this, Vue is going to evaluate an expression and that result of that expression will be here. So And I showed that before. If this is a string, for example, it would show up as a string. So for example, if I write this as a string where it says I have the string fi plus a string en, then the class will be theme. It's basically adding two strings together. Not the most useful example, but just to show you that whatever we put here, if we write colon class, is basically an expression that Vue can evaluate. It's Vue basically handling a formula that we put inside there. It's like the difference between writing something in Excel as a normal value and writing an equal sign in Excel saying 12 plus 4, or this cell plus this cell. And basically, that's what we're doing. We're looking up parts of our, or how we want to set our app. We are going to look that up in different parts of our app. For example, in our data part here of our app. But that's not really what we're looking for. We're looking for now is how we set to this. So we had that before. Class is now an object where we have a property done, and that's set to true. Again, this one, if this is active, then the property will be active. But because this has there's no CSS for active, there's only CSS for done, this doesn't do anything. It doesn't change anything. It just adds that class. So that's why we're using the word done here. And then true has to change. So what do we have to change it to?
False.
Okay. So if we set it to false, what happens is that none of them will be true. Now, that's good for the first one. It's good for the last one, but it's not good for the middle one because that one is actually where done is actually set to true. So
If it's checked, it has to go to false.
yeah, daar komen ze bieden. So in a minute, we're going to add this interactivity, but this part needs to change, right? This needs to be dynamic.
Current, is it something with the current style?
No, that's also coming from here where it says current glyph and whatever. But if we look at this analogy, so if we take this example, what's happening here is this is evaluating a condition. It's saying, is glyph equal to current glyph? And then the result of that evaluation will be either true or it will be false, right? And that's what we need to set. In our case, it's actually easier because we already have that condition. We already, well, it's not really a condition. We just have this property done that's either going to be set to false or true. And that is exactly what we need to see here. Does that make sense? So if we would have a system where false, the first item would be false because this first item here is false. And the second item would be true here because the second item is true. And then the third item would be false again because that one would be false. That would be ideal, right?
Is it also if box checked?
If
False?
box checked.
Yeah.
Maybe it's actually easier. Remember, we are already, so what is this thing? This is an object, right? And this object contains key value pairs. Those are called properties. So we always have a name of a property called description, and then we have a value of that description. Now, in this case, the name of this property that indicates whether an item is completed is called done. So that's the name of that item, and the value of that is false or true. Did we access properties before already here in our app?
Yeah, it's item.
Yeah.
The item dot description.
Right.
Developers.
So we did it here with item.description, which was a way to access the current item, which constantly changes, and then takes the value out of that description.
So now we need item.value or description.value.
So close. Yeah, indeed. So what if we do item.done here? What if we go to each item and we ask if it's done or not? Remember, done here needs to have a true or false value, and that true or false value is available here. So exciting. Let's check. And it works.
Yeah.
Right? So bit of a bummer, but yeah. Ah, maar wacht, dat hebben we nog niet gedaan. Ja, okay, so good point. So it's not checked here yet. that's a different part of HTML, right? Remember, if we did it here, what we did here to make the item itself, the checkbox checked, is to add checked here, right? That's what made these checked. Now, again, if we do it here, we're going to make them all checked, which is not really the purpose here. But maybe we could do it this way. Maybe you can say checked, and here I'm not really sure if we can do this. Checked equals, and remember now it's Vue taking over. And now if we ask in between the brackets, if we ask item.done, then we can say, well, it's checked if the item is done. That sort of makes sense, right?
It's then the same as we just said.
Yeah, it's also looking at the item, taking done, and then saying oh, that will be the value of checked. So either it's checked is true or false. In our case, if the item here, the checkbox is checked like this, it's going to be checked. And as you see, it works, I think.
For me, it does not work.
Maar die weet ook altijd niet dat item done betekent dat het iets moet doorstrepen.
Jawel, want done
Is false
is done is
of true?
is in this case done here is true, and we had some styling here that's going to indicate that lee.done, so a list item with the class done has these extra rules, right? So that's why this one has these rules applied to them, and this one doesn't have these rules applied to them. Like there's extra rules for the ones that are done. But the checked one doesn't work, you saying? That's weird. Why does it work in my case? So what needs to happen is that the ones that are done here actually need to have these check markers here. So I added this. So in the same vein as I had checked here,
Okay, it's just in the wrong.
I wrote here. So not in the list item, but the checkbox itself. Yeah. So the checkbox has a property called checked, which is true or false. And so if it's true, it's true when the item is done, and it's false when the item is not done.
Maar dat niet vinden zijn.
Ja, dat is toch best niet aan het doen.
Nee, we zijn nog niet die andere aan het aanpakken. We zijn echt wel. Ah, wel, dat zijn aan het aanpakken.
So there, it's not interactive yet, right? We can click these, but that doesn't have any effect yet. Yeah. So we're basically, okay, so if that's confusing, we're basically in read-only mode. We can't change anything right now, right? We're just looking at a view of our app, like we take a screenshot out of this, saying, okay, now it's this, we show to the client we're at this stage. It looks interactive, but it's not actually interactive. It's just listing these items. But remember, it's already doing that quite well. So if we set one of them to false and we add another item, teach Vue.js, that's not done yet. Then you see I add another item and I see that in the list. So I don't have to change any HTML. It's basing this on data, right? Try that out and see if that works as well. So add another item here in the list to verify that we actually see that item in your to-do app. Mine, okay, 2 hours has passed already. Is this working for everybody?
Yeah.
Indra, Ezra, also online?
Yes.
Right, awesome. Any questions? So I think this is already quite powerful because even though we're just looking at the data, we already understand that if we take something that is any kind of data, so anything we can visualize in HTML, think about like an image gallery, for example. And I'm specifically looking for one that has like names or something. Yeah. Okay, so maybe not the best thing. Or let's say like hotel review site or something. I don't know. Something like this. So how would we model this in Vue.js? Any ideas? Yeah. So, right. So it's basically a list of, in this case, top secret hotels. And we do a V4. So we design one block like this, which contains a bit more information than the to-do app that we just had. In our case, it contains, so how would we call this thing? What do we see on one item? Yeah, so this would be called like a hotel, but what is inside of that hotel? What do we see? Photo, rating, smileys, location, the price, indeed, the title or the name of the hotel. And then the button, that's actually a good question. Is the button part of the data of the hotel? It's always the same. So the button is going to be the interactive part. So it will be part of this V4 element. So in this case, it's a more complex element. It's not just one list item, but it's actually a div with flexbox saying, okay, there's an image here, and there's text here, and then there's text here. So probably 3 columns with information. So one for the image, one, the bigger one FR for this whole thing, and then one for the price. And then inside we have indeed hotel.image or hotel.thumbnail or something, hotel.title, hotel.rating, hotel.price. And then this one is like a button, not hotel.button, but just a regular button with an @click event saying, okay, select hotel or something. And that then goes to the next page and does something. But once you start seeing this principle, you see it everywhere, basically, right? Because this happens everywhere where you have a list of items. So basically any site on the internet, like eBay, if you go shopping or to the Hansa or something, every item on that site also is styled this way. There's a V4 going over all the items and then basically saying what each item does, because they're all styled in the same way, right? And so you can look this up and just find any kind of site and sort of think about, so whenever you're browsing, also on Facebook or something, whenever you're browsing, think of this idea of, okay, this is actually a list that contains these items, and how would I style this in HTML? Because this applies for everything. So you can make all of these sites. You can't make them interactive yet, but you can make this page and make it work if somebody gives you the data already. This is really powerful. Right? Even though it looks very simple right now, it's the same principle applies. All right. Do you need a break or? Yes? Okay. If Fien says we need a break, we need a break. I'm going to set in. So that's the basic idea. And now we want to basically add some interactivity to it. And we can choose. So either we are going to add our input type here. So this one, we can add an item to the list, or we can basically make lists active. Maybe we can do that second part first. Maybe it's a bit easier. So here for checked, what we need to do for this input type is whenever our changes, so whenever we click here, then the item should also be marked done, right? Or not done. So how do we need to do this? Where would we need our interactivity to be? Or did we do this before already somewhere, and can we copy and paste from there? Yes, we can. Yeah, so in Vue Glypher thingy, we do an @click, and that sort of seems like a good thing to copy and paste. Yeah, so here, for example, if we click, then something happens. So what's a bit different though, is that in Glypher, when we click, what happens is that the current glyph is equals to a glyph. Now, do we have a current to-do item in our thing? No. Yeah. Do we need a current to-do item? Does it make sense? Yeah, so, yeah, right. So there's not, in this case, there's not specific one that says, okay, this item is now current or active or whatever. That only happens here because we don't show all the letters at the same time. We only show one, so we have to know which one we are showing. So the state is a bit different here. Indeed, we don't need any extra state actually in our app. So in our to-do app, the data, we don't actually need to append anything to it. Instead, what we need is a way to take the item that we're on here, and we need to make sure that that item is now, yeah, either it was done and it's not done anymore, or most likely it's not done and we made it done, right? All right.
Don't we have to change the false and true values in the list of items?
Yeah. So here, these ones you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's eventually indeed what we need to happen, right? So is that if we click do the dishes and that's set to false, for example, then that if we click it, that specific item, then that becomes true, right? What's going to happen the moment that that's true is that Vue.js will render it again for us. So do the whole thing behind the scenes, and make sure that then this one has a class of done, and then the input is also checked. That's what Vue will do for us. We have to basically make sure that something in our code changes this from false to true, or the other way around. So I already heard the suggestion to add click, so to add an event handler. And again, these are the long form or the short form ones, which is with the add, but there's the long form also works, and I keep forgetting how they are called. But in the Vue.js reference, we can also look for that as well. So we can here go to reference, and then somewhere there's like an add click. Where is that thing? Are we looking at the right one? This one. Yeah, so the long form is this one, which is v on. So v on click is actually the same thing as just writing add click. It's basically saying, okay, whenever we click, something needs to happen. All right. So what needs to happen? Well, we could do the first case. So imagine that all of my to-do items here in my list are all set to false as they are now. If we click, could we make an item true? How will we do that?
Maybe it's something like the double the curly braces from the line of
Like here, you mean? Like these ones? Or the double curly braces? No. Like this.
I don't know what.
Yeah. So probably in this code, whatever it is that we need to do, we probably need to refer to item.done, right?
Mm-hmm.
That needs to change. So probably we have to write something like item.done. Now in JavaScript, whenever we change something, remember we can also do this here from the console. I showed this last time. We can also say mounted app.items, and then we can look at the list of items, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I can ask mounted app.items and look at item 0 with these square brackets. And now I get what's called a proxy, but basically reference to that first item here. So I could call this item equals mounted app.items 0, and it's basically like we have now. So we're basically looking at that item. So if we can ask here, we can ask it for item.description, which is do the dishes, and item.done, which is false. And so that's because I'm asking here for mounted app items 0, which is the first item in the list. If I ask for item 1, then the item description will be pay my bills, and then done will also be set to false because that's also false. And now what I can also do is I can set out item.done equals true and see what happens. So this code actually triggers Vue to re-render the app and make sure that that actually happens. So we can do this in the console just by typing it out, by really looking at what we need to do. Right? So this is very convenient. That means that this one, we could try, is take this code and actually put that in the click handler here. So here we say for click item.done equals true. And remember, this single equals means an assignment. It means that we're now setting item.done to true. We're not checking if it's true, we're setting it to true. We're saying it's always true. And so now if we click, we should see that we can set these items to true.
And why don't we need to draw versus here?
View syntax? I don't know. This is a statement that's being executed. We don't need anything extra for this. Is it working?
No.
So this is the code I added, right? Click equals item.done, not true. So item here, again, referring to the current item, so the item I am on, and it's setting its done property to true. Yeah, so if I click here, what needs to happen is the checkbox is checked, and also it has a... Okay, ik ga eens even checken. Hè? Yeah, so if you uncheck it, that's also a good point. The thing is unchecked, which is kind of funny, but it's still marked as done. And that's because there's no code for setting the item back to false, right? It's always true, even if it's, yeah, if we don't do anything. So we still need to fix that. Item. Michel moet op uw fouten letten. Item, nee, wel. Ja. Nou, dus als je nu eentje aanvinkt. Ja. Maar je ziet, je kunt ze niet ontvinken, dus dat is er nog niet. De item.done staat nu true, en dat is altijd true. Dus als je klikt, is het true. Ja. Ja, natuurlijk wel. Ja, maar dat is een goede begin. En is dat doorstrepen lukt er ook niet bij je precies?
Ja, dat is.
Ah ja. Dus ik heb dat met text decoration line true gedaan.
Ja.
Je hebt zo text decoration underline voor een streep eronder, zoals een link. Text decoration line true is met een lijn erdoor. Line, L-I-N. Ja, niet line. Ja, die. Ja, nu geeft het dan. Perfect. Look at this. Yeah, dus dan denk ik graag. All right. So how do we do the other case? Well, it's kind of silly. We can't really write item done is false here, right? So there's two ways that we can do this. We're going to do the short version, and then also I'm going to do the extended version, the extended edition, which hopefully won't take 3 hours. And that's going to do the flipping, just like we did with the flipcat. It's sort of going to flip the two state. But here what we can do is, if we think about it, if an item is done and we click it, it needs to be undone. So if the done is true, it needs to be false. If we click it and it's false, it needs to be set to true, right? So just like a light switch, it has to flip from the true state to the false state, and then back again from the false state to true state. So basically it has to react to the current state. If the state is true, then it has to be false. If the state is false, it has to be true. And so it's basically saying that, well, we could do this, which would be silly, but this is saying item done equals item done. So if the item is true, then the item will be true. That does, of course, doesn't do anything because it doesn't change anything. But this is a Boolean, and Boolean meaning it's true or false value. If we add an exclamation mark in front, that means that it flips the state of the item. It's basically saying if it's true, then it's false. If it's false, then it's true. So now if we click, we can see that we can click and unclick these items. Right, so this line, item done equals, and we read this exclamation mark here as not. So it's basically saying not item done. So if this would be, if you think about it, if this is true, So if this is true, not true basically means false, so the item will be false. If item done is false, not false equals true, so the item will be true. So if it was false before, it will be true. If it's true before, it will be false. So that's what the not is doing. It's basically flipping the switch. And so the exclamation mark we read as a not. That's really syntax in JavaScript that you have to know. And now if we check and uncheck these work, and also internally, we know that this works, right? We have our data, so we know that these items are done or not done. I said there was a longer form as well, so I want to show this as well, just for completeness sake. So you can do it inside of the code, but also it can happen outside of the code, which means that it happens here in main.js with a method. So here for the click, what we're going to do is we're going to write toggle item, and we're going to give it the item itself, because it needs to know which item it is, right? Because remember, we're doing this for all the items. So for every item, it needs to know if we click toggle, which item to toggle. Now, if we save, this doesn't work because it says, well, I don't know what toggle item is. You refer to this toggle item thing, but what do you mean? It's not a function, it doesn't exist. So we need to make that item, that function here, and we make it here in our Vue create app. So remember, we had our data property here, which is this one, but we're also going to have a methods property. And this one we are going to write with a colon and then like this. So methods is, so Vue.create_app is an object. Methods is also an object containing the methods that we need in our app. And so the only method that we have now is this toggle item. Do we call it that way? I think so. Which is a function, and that function takes the current item like this. And what does it do? Well, it does exactly the same as before. So it's going to say item.done equals not item.done. Right, so we didn't change anything. We just made sure that this code is now inside of a method, inside of our app, which is maybe a bit cleaner. And also if it's longer, if a lot of things are happening, this is sort of the way that you would do it for longer things. Note that we don't have to toggle the item here. We can do whatever we want. We can also set the description to, probably a bad idea, because now what we are also doing is changing the text of the item itself, but yeah. Just to show that we can do anything here, right? We don't have to just only do that part. We can also, for example, probably a bad idea as well, but we can also remove the item. If we say, well, if the item is done now, so we checked it, if the item is done, we're just going to remove it from the list of items and it's no longer there. Also, probably not something that we want to do, but it's something that we can do if we want to. So, and the reason why I showed methods is because they're also a core concept. So you have data, you have methods, and there was one extra thing that we also used in our other apps, and specifically in the font edit app. So this one, and that is the computed property. And a computed property, maybe it makes more sense if I show you the shop project. We are going to need 5 more lessons if we want to complete everything. But the idea of the shop project is that you type a name and then that you buy the letters of your name. So if I type Frederick, I have 8 letters that I have to buy in 2 styles. So I have to. So these are obviously computed properties, right? These are obviously calculations that the system has to do. There it sort of makes sense. So inside of our shop code, we have these computed properties where it says, well, what's the net price? Well, a letter costs €5. So we take the length of your name and multiply it by the letter price. And then we multiply it by the amount of styles. So these are the styles, the amount of styles that you selected. So if you select all 3, you do this, multiply by 5, multiply by 3, which is €120. And then the total price is the net price plus the shipping. And the shipping is dependent. Like if the net price is below 50, then it costs money. And otherwise, if we pay more than 50, then it's 0. So we have all of these parts that are computed parts. Now, in our to-do app, we don't really have that right now, but we're going to invent one just because we can. And what we're going to invent here for our computed properties, so we're going to add computed here, is we're going to invent that if we, below that, we want to see how many items we still need to complete. So a number that basically says the amount of to-do items. So I'm going to call that amount to do, like this. So how many items do I have to do here? And then I'm going to write that function. So we're not going to write that function initially. So if you're confused with what we're trying to do, maybe it makes sense to do it, take even another step back. So whenever we're doing this kind of programming, we have to have a plan, right? So the plan, we can think of the plan initially of just making a sketch. But basically what I want to do here is after this UL, I want to have a paragraph here. And you can write that as well, right? Saying like 5 items still need to be done. Something like this. Right? And if we check one off, what needs to happen? Well, this needs to be set to 4, and then 3, and then 2, and then 1, and then 0. Right? And then we can also like celebrate, but whatever. We're just going to, right now, just make a number that counts down. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what we need to do. So if we, let's fake it for now. And let's say, well, I don't know how to calculate that first, but let's say that the amount of to-dos is always 5. So return 5. This is like the silliest solution. Actually, there's now 4 items, so probably want to return 4 here. Doesn't really matter because, of course, that's not correct at all. But now if we go back to our index, how do we change that here?
Use the double.
Yeah, indeed. Perfect. So here we write the name of the computed property, so amount to do. So in Vue, if the properties either comes from data or it's computed, it's accessed the same way. So we look at it the same way. The only difference is that the computed properties start from the data, and the data is just, that's like the root of our source. Now, yeah. Yeah. So this should work. It should return 4 items still need to be done. And if this is set to 400, it should say 400 items still need to be done. Kan je even komen zien, hè? But also make sure to check that you have data here written like this, methods right like this, and computed here, right? And then you have these commas in between. And also check the console. So if you have any errors, make sure that this appears in the console. For example, if you made a typo here, it's going to say property was accessed but is not defined.
Yes, it's
Dit is de naam hetzelfde. Ah ja, maar hier staat kop muted. Dus ja, beautiful. Oké. Dus typo's komen heel frequent voor. Krijg je een fout ontzettend?
Nee.
Wacht. Dat ziet er allemaal goed uit. En dan, maar hier staat wel, ah ja, nog taken, ja, dat klopt ook. Maar Vue doet niks. Allee, ik bedoel die haakjes. Ah, wacht, ik heb nog eens een stukje. Hier. Ik moet even aan het zien wat er in een div staat, maar u...
Ja.
Uw computer is juist. Dat is
That's how you
Maar ik vind het raar dat hier er niets doen is. Wacht even, ik ga eens terugzeggen. Dus hier staat een div. Dat wil dat zeggen dat we eigenlijk een div van gaat afsluiten. Hier al. Dit moet een slash OI zijn. Dus ik daar eens uitgesproken. Ja, en dus nu die matchen, dan een URL, dan een paragraaf. En dus ervoor dat het andere div zou gaan. Ja, toevallig werkt dat. Ja, dat is een moeilijke bus. Okay, so how would we figure this out? How many to-dos that we need to do? How would we? So it of course it doesn't work to always write 4 here, right? Because the moment that we check something, this needs to be 3. Now, remember this is a computed item, so we could also, but this is a bad idea. We could also in items we could also add something here where it's like amount to do. We could also write it here, and then whenever we do an item, we could say, well, the amount to do is now -1 or +1. But this is much easier because now it's always correct. It's always in sync basically with this data. It's always correct. But we still need to calculate. So how do we calculate? How would we know how to do that? Yeah. So we have to start with the items, right? We have to do something with these items, right? We have to go, so the plan is we hold like a running total. So we hold a total of items that we need to do, and we start with 0. Then we go through each of the items, and for each item, we check if the item is done or not. If the item is done, then we don't have to do anything. But if the item is not done, we still have to do the item. And so we are going to add 1 to our running total, right? And at the very end, after we've looked through all of the items, we're going to return the value of that running total, right? Which will be the value of the items that we still need to do. Does that make sense? At least planning-wise? Okay. So step 1 is we have a running total. So let's call that let running total equals 0.
If you do calculations, you use let.
Yeah, because this, if we make this const, we can never change it. But here, of course, we want to be able to add something to it. Okay, and now comes the loop, because we now want to loop through all of these items. So we're going to say for const item in this dot items. A few things to note. This one is const because the item itself never changes. It's just the running total that changes, but the item itself, we're just looking at it. We don't have to change anything. And then this dot items refers to the items here in that data property, right?
I do have a question. Is are let and const? I read somewhere that let and const are interchangeable. Do they actually have different?
No, not quite. So in one way they are. So I could use let here without any issues, but I can't write const here because this one won't be const. So const means it doesn't change, and let means it's a variable, but it changes. So I prefer to use const wherever I can to indicate to JavaScript that this will never change. If I then accidentally do something where I do make a change, then JavaScript will warn me. That's the reason why I use this thing. So I make code that's like immutable first, and then if I know that I need to change something, then I change it to let. But most of the time, everything will be const in the code that I write, if I can help it, unless it needs to be let.
Maybe what I read was that they were both applied to like the local scope. And that's
yeah. So it used to be that you have only one, which is var, but the var is super confusing in the way that it works. So I never use it anymore. I only use let or const. Yeah, and preferably const. But you will find if I do it here and I then change something to the running total, so I add 1 here, for example, then it will complain because it says, well, you can't change that because it's immutable. Okay, so let's try that first. So instead of just doing running total and actually checking if the item is done, we're just going to add something to it. So every time we go through the loop, we're going to add 1 to the running total. So we're not even looking at the item, we're just always adding 1. And then also probably in the very end, we don't want to return 4 after all that hard work. We also want to return the running total, right? So what we have now is we don't see the items that need to be done. We just see all the items. It's just a count of all the items. So if we add another item here, then now I have 5 items, and now it says 5 items here. But it doesn't look at if the items are different or done or not.
And do we have to add the running total into the...
So here?
Yes.
No, this one is called amount to do here. So the running total, this name of the variable is only available in that amount to do whenever it's doing a calculation, but outside of a function, it's like it doesn't exist. Yeah. So we probably want to check the item to see if it's done. Does it work? First off, do you see that this updates if you add items?
No.
Or remove items? So if I remove some items here, I will probably also see that I only have 2 items here. And if I have more items, then I probably want to see more items here. Nee?
Als je meer aanklikt, dat er...
Nee, niet aanklikken. Hè? So we're not looking at whether they're clicked or not. We're just looking at the amount of items. So now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you see that it says 5 here. If I remove a couple, now I have 3 items, and it says 3 items. Whether they're checked or not, it doesn't really matter, but it's just basically the total count of everything. And why is that? Because we're doing a running total. We're looping over all the items. So we're doing this loop 3 times if I have 3 items. And for each item, it's just going to set the running total to 1 or +1. So in the end, what happens is that we're just doing an expensive version of count or length. So how do we check? So we can't always do running total equals 1. We have to do a condition around it. So this needs to be wrapped in a condition. So before this line, we have to write if, that's our condition. And then what do we need to check?
If the box is checked.
If the box is checked. But remember, the fact that the box is checked is actually, let's say, a conclusion or a consequence of the data, right? Yeah, that sounds good. But can we just write done? Does the system know what we're talking about? Yeah. So we have to refer to that item. So item is, again, an object. That's this thing. And we're looking at that property. If item not done, and then what Fien said, equals false. Then, and now we write a curly brace here, and then we write a curly brace here. So basically this running total goes inside of that condition. So only if the item done, or if the item is not done, then we are going to add to our running total. And does this work? Does that work? No. Yeah. So yeah, so that depends on whether you have items that are true or not. So if you start out with some items, and if you check item done here, then those items will be counted. But actually, this one is a bit too complex, because basically what we need to do, the result of this if condition needs to be true or false. So basically, if true or if false, something needs to happen, right? But item.done is already true or false. So we can just use that. We don't have to write the equals sign. We can just ask for that. So we can ask for if item done. Now it's going to indicate if the items are done, I hope. Or even better, if not item done, because that's really what needs to happen. Why is this not working? Oh, sorry, I made a silly mistake. And this is a stupid thing in JavaScript, but here it's not actually looping over the items. So here where it says for const item in items, we actually have to write for const item of this dot items. Yeah, what? Indeed. So it's not failing, but it's also not working. Yeah. And so a good trick to see the difference. So if I do for const item in items and I log this out, what's going to log out is that it's just having a number of the item. So in const item in item just gives the number of this item, which is not really what we want. If we do for const item of item, we actually get the item itself. So with a proxy around it, but that's not really important. It gives us this data of the item. And now we can ask if not the item is done, then we can indicate. And note that if we now check these things, everything stays in sync, right? So we can check items and this count updates, and we can uncheck items and this count updates. If you think about doing this without something like Vue and just manually updating all these things, it's really a nightmare. So I'm glad that we can do it this way.
What did you do before Vue? I mean, did you just have to do that before Vue?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it was horrible. Yeah.
So Vue is pretty.
Yeah, so there are a couple of, yeah, these are, I think that's in the last, like this was coming out 4 or 5 years ago. There were two big frameworks. There's Vue.js and there's React. And both actually have this idea of what's called reactive programming. It's sort of the way that you can look at it is the way that Excel does something. So they have these formulas, and if you update something in one cell, all the rest updates. And that's actually what you see here as well. The trick that they do is that they do it very efficiently. So they don't change the whole page. They don't re-render the whole page, but they only change the parts that they know. So they have this, internally, they have this, what's called a dependency graph, basically remembering, okay, this part depends on this part, and this part depends on this part. And that's super complex, and we don't have to worry about it, luckily. But that's internally what's going on. Yeah.
Is there a reason that hasn't just been added to JavaScript?
There are some ideas of adding that immediately to the browser, yeah.
Is it just politics?
No. That's because React and Vue, for example, they solve the same problem, but they solve it very differently. In React, we don't do it by, we don't start from an HTML file, for example. In React, this file would be completely empty, and all the rendering, so even the like list items here, that would happen in JavaScript, where the HTML actually shows up in the JavaScript file, which is kind of weird, but already also, yeah, pretty normal right now. I chose Vue specifically because I think it has like a gradual approach from taking an HTML thing and sort of adding tags to it, these Vue tags, making your app interactive instead of React, where it's basically, I mean, I use React professionally like all the time. I use Vue less, but for React, it's basically throw everything out of the window and start with a clean slate. And yeah, maybe that's like a too harsh approach right now. So I want to do more gradual approach maybe. All right, there's one more that I want to do and then we can stop. And that's if we, what happens if we type an item here and we press enter, how can we add an item here, right? That would be useful as well. I have to think how we're going to do that. So the way that would work is we want to check what the what we type here, and if we press enter, for example, then we want to have that be a new item that we add to our list. So basically, we want to check here if a key is pressed. I think maybe. Let's see. Does this work? No. But something happens. That's already cool. So if we do key press, now we can write our method here. So we can say on or like handle key press. So we add this. So this means whenever we type a key, we're going to add that. Now we're not interested in all the keys. We're just interested in the single key that we press when we press enter, but we'll look at that in a minute. So if we now start typing, it says property handle key press is not available. So we're going to add that to methods here. So after toggle item, we're going to write handle key press. Make sure that if you write it like this here, you also write it like this here. Yeah. And then what we're going to do here, and Vue doesn't really It's not really too happy about that if we do it like this, but that's fine. Oh, that also works. So handle key press actually gives us an event, and here we can log that event. So even though we didn't say that we need to log our event, that's what we get from Vue. So we do handle key press between brackets event. So that's the event of the fact that we typed, and then we can log that event. Right. And now, so whenever, so if you have the console open, whenever you type a key, you see that you get all these events here. Right. So tell me if that's not working. So you have key press here, and then in main, you have it here. Nee, wacht, ik ga even de twee splitsen. So you can see them both at the same time. So I added this, and I added this. Right. Ja, maar de naam is echt hetzelfde. Dus de hoofdletters, als je het hier met hoofdletters schrijft, hier ook met hoofdletters. Dus handle. Nee, dus de eerste letters doe ik met een kleine letter en dan doe ik de K en dan is het nog een P. Ofwel doet ze nergens, ofwel doet ze ook. Maar dat is de normale manier van het schrijven. En dan save. En dan bij handle key press hier, ik had ook een keer op event geschreven. En? Ja. Je krijgt zo, ja. Michel. En als je hier iets stipt, wat de bedoeling is dat je hier iets stipt. En dat is allemaal schrijven. Ja. Dat is nog een beste tekst. Wacht, maar dat zijn niet het juiste elementen. Dat moet hier op dit element staan. Je geeft daar nu op een list item. Dus die key press gebeurt op het moment dat je in dat veld stikt. Dus dat veld is in die type stikt. Ja. Ja, perfect. Okay. Dus je ziet hier op die keys en dan enter. So if you type something, and especially if you type enter, we see that you have these keys that you type. So if I type hello here and press enter, you see that I get all these keys, HALLO, enter. So I get events for all of the keys that I type. Even the backspace keys doesn't work, but the enter key for us is the most important one. We have to check that. Also, you see that the keyboard event has a bunch of properties. So it has the code that we typed, but it also has something like the type itself, the char code, whether we press the control key, whether we press the alt key. And then there's also a really important one, which is the target. So which element did we press that on? Because we will need that as well. So, nee? Ik krijg een waarschuwing van het fout. Ja, daar moet een komma staan. Ja, dat is getipt. Ja, okay. So we're going to be a bit faster here. So basically for our event, we had all of these inputs here that we can type. And so as you can see here, and that's also how I do this, that's why console log is so useful. I have this key property. And so if I press enter, then you see key equals, so the key is equal to enter. And that's what we're going to check for. So here we're going to say if event.key equals enter, that means that we press the enter key. And then if we press the enter key, what needs to happen? Well, first off, we need to know, we need to add a new item to our to-dos, right? That's the point. So the item that we just typed, we need to add it to our to-dos. So there's two things that we need to do. First, we have to get the text from the box itself, which we'll do in a minute. And then the second thing that we have to do is make a new item. And then the third thing that we need to do, I said there were two things, so that's a lie. The third thing that I need to do is take that new item that we created and push it on the list. And then the fourth thing that we need to do in the increasingly inaccurately called toItems is actually if we type something here and we press enter, this text actually needs to be removed as well because we want to type a new one. So 4 things. Okay, so what was the first thing again? 1. The first thing is get the text from the input field. All right. Then the second thing we need to do is make a new to-do item. Third thing that we need to do, and this is already a good approach to programming, is just listing out the things that we need to do. Add the new to-do item to the list. Fourth item, clear the input field. Right, we're a bit over time, so I'm not going to ask you to do all of these yourself. I'm just going to show you how to do that. So if we click an event, one of the things that we got from the event was a target. And so we can log here, we can say event.target. That's going to print out the text field here. So I'm going to remove this console log event because it's kind of annoying. But so now if I type something and press enter, you see I get a return back to this item. So event.target refers to the text field that we type. That's not very useful by itself, but it also has this property called value. And value is actually what we typed inside of this field. So this is the text of the item itself. So event.target.value gives us the text of that input target field, right? So if you want to try it out, you can do console log event.target.value. But really what we need is not the console log. We need to store that into a variable. So I'm going to call this variable description because that's what it is. And that's our step 1. So it's getting the text from the input field and now putting that in a field called description. All right. Step 2, make a new to-do item. So if we look at our to-do items, what they contain is they don't just contain this text, right? They're actually objects, and these objects contain 2 things. They contain the description, which we just typed, but they also contain this done flag. And initially, probably if we make a new to-do item, we don't want to set it to done immediately. That would be not very useful. So we want to set it to done to false. So we're going to make one of those and give that a name. So I'm going to say const new item equals. Then just as we write this item, we're going to write description. And what's the description? Well, the description is actually this description. So description colon is equal to the description. And done is equal to false because it's not done yet. All right, then third thing that we need to do is add the new to-do item to the list. And the list is called items. So we do, or this.items, so we do this.items. And to add an item to a list at the end, we use push. So we say push new item. And this should already work. So we're basically we don't have to do anything anymore. The last step is optional, but it's nice to have to be able to clear this out. But we should already be able to type something and then have that append to the list. Now, if you keep pressing enter, of course, we keep seeing new empty items, but.
Maar zijn we enkel in dit stukje?
Ja, dat is de code, pardon, dat is de code die ik heb toegevoegd. Lukt er iets niet? Ik ga nog de laatste regel laten zien. So I'm going to show the last rule, which is event.target.value equals nothing. So it's basically going back to the input field, which is event.target, that's the input field, and setting the value to an empty string. So these 2 quotes next to each other is basically an empty string, so nothing. So now if you type something, they're added, and note that the count is also updated immediately, which is awesome. And then I'm going to check what's going wrong.
Description is not defined.
Ah ja, is it? ziet dat ook. Dus als description in dat andere ding, dat wordt gereisd, dat wil zeggen dat
Ja,
je
ja.
variabelen niet gebruikt. Dus dat is altijd slecht teken, want ja,
Ja.
als je variabelen maakt en gebruikt niet, dat is meestal betekent dat iets mis. Wat je merkt ook op is dat je kaart ook wordt geüpdate. Dat ook allemaal werkt. Dus dat is ook allemaal dingen die je niet zelf moet doen, dat wordt gewoon viewen.
Ja, natuurlijk.
Alright. Werkt dat bij u?
Ja.
Je moet mee oppassen. If item done equals false. Als je één equal doet, doe je een sign, dat wil zeggen dat je echt op dat moment aan de eigenlijk false gaat maken en dan ja, je hebt die drie codes, is gelijk aan.
En dan wou die item pullen, dus push en hop.
Ah ja, nee. Ja, push en pop bestaan, maar dat gaat aan het einde van de les. Ik denk, als je het in het begin wil zetten, is de JavaScript-term is unshift. Ik weet het niet nou. Dus als je in plaats van push unshift schrijft, dan een begin steken.
Hier.
Ja. En die namen, dat zijn natuurlijk dingen die je van buiten kunt geven. Dat zijn zaken die je kunt opzoeken. Van hoe werkt je lijst? Dus als je nu iets in je lijst steekt, je typt iets in, dan zou je dat in het begin moeten. Dus push is aan het einde en unshift is aan het begin. Dat is een heel rare naam. Dat gaat dus ook. Werkt het? Yeah. So we're going to stop for today, I think. You see, we had a lot of other things planned, but maybe it's good that we end here just to have a basic understanding of one app that we made together. And that we really understand all the parts. I think that's really key. You see that there's still a lot to learn. That's logical. It's big. It's a big challenge to be able to do this. Already we've come quite far. And there are also a couple of things that, and I think that's important, that you don't really worry about anymore. You know the HTML, for example, you know what it's doing. You know that CSS selects these things. You know what a list looks like in JavaScript. So there's a bunch of things that you already are so familiar with that you don't even question yourself. And that's also important to keep in mind that there's a couple of things that we can do already without even realizing that we are doing it, because they're normal, I would say. All right, so I'm going to